ladies and gentlemen, mystery seekers, musers, conspiracy theorists, interdimensional philosophers, seekers of truth, and last but not least, all of you with confirmation bias. You will find what you're looking for. You're listening to Musings on Mysteries and the Mythical Matrix podcast. We are your hosts. I'm Josiah.
And I am Trace.
So, I guess we'll kind of introduce ourselves a little bit here. So, Trace, I'll let you have the floor there since I kind of kicked off the intro.
Okay. So I'm Trace Ritchie. I am currently in college studying marine biology. So, just a quick note, I am going to kind of be a more grounded science viewpoint into this whole thing, and I'm just kind of along for the ride. I'll be coming in for episodes here and there, discussing some like mythology topics. That's kind of more of my strong suit, especially the Norse, and I'll be doing some fish facts along the way, just because why not? So for starters, the giant squid, the Architeuthis ducks, has the biggest eyeball in the animal kingdom.
I don't know what that is, but that's pretty wild.
It's a giant squid.
Oh, okay. Fair enough.
Kraken.
Fair enough. So you're saying you're coming from a more grounded science perspective. I do want to clarify for all of our listeners out there, I am definitely also going to have a very scientific perspective on everything in the show. My intent is to more kind of logically speculate on ideas and play around with lots of what ifs, if you will, if that makes sense. So I'm Josiah. I'm kind of a jack of all trades, master of none kind of approach to life. I'm a chaplain. I go into like factories and stuff like that and provide like Christian crisis care. I own a drone business. I do martial arts. I did a brief stint at a radio studio actually. So I'm kind of all over the place with stuff that I do and everything. But yeah, so that's a little bit about me there. So you all listening out there kind of know who we are. So Trace, let's talk about the purpose of this show here. What's your take on the purpose of the show? Since you're going to be a co-host of it and all that.
Yeah, I think, honestly, it's just kind of a way for us to have fun and share our conversations, because I think they're good conversations for just the general people to hear. We're going to just, making some interesting connections and just kind of have fun.
Yeah, absolutely. So the purpose of the show is, from my perspective here, let's break down the name because most of it's in the name here. We're musing, we're thinking, we're having logical thoughts and discourse on mysteries. So we're going to tackle stuff like Bigfoot, 411, aliens, UFOs, all that sort of fun stuff. And then the Mythical Matrix. The Mythical Matrix, I think that there's a lot of truth about our history buried in myth that gets often overlooked just because it's myth. It gets dismissed. And this idea actually comes from the Atlantis dialogue. For those of you that aren't familiar, the Atlantis dialogue is where the whole Atlantis theory comes from. You have a Greek character, I believe his name is Solon. Yeah, it was Solon. Solon, he's a political figure. He gets into some trouble. He runs off to Egypt, and he spends some time with these Egyptian priests. And these Egyptian priests are talking to him and everything, and they're like, hey, you have this myth of Helios, the sun god. His son, his biological son, takes his chariot, the sun, S-U-N, like the, Bob, the big orange ball in the sky, and he rides it too close to the earth, and it burns up, portions of the planet. And then the Egyptian priest goes on to say, this has the appearance of a myth in your literature, but it's actually there's actually a true story here. There's actually components of truth in it. And so whether or not you accept the Atlantis dialogue as 100% true or 100% false, I think it does warrant study, and it warrants speculation. Just to play around with the ideas, because there's no harm in throwing around the ideas and asking questions and trying to draw connections. And that's kind of the intent here. Is we're trying to draw connections and to figure out what's the original, the matrix of it all? What's the original? Where is the truth in it? So we're not looking, we're both coming from a Christian worldview here, but I'm not looking to have this be some kind of theological discussion. This is more of a philosophical discussion and just speculation and wondering about the world and about life and about mysteries and the mythical matrix. So, yeah, so we're both definitely going to be coming from a logical perspective here. But yeah, any thoughts on that? Anything you want to add?
I wouldn't say so, no. Just, like you said, we're just kind of connecting the dots here and maybe just making some connections that some people don't think of. Um, it's also just a way for us, for ourselves, to also just have some interesting talks for our own personal beliefs and what have you, and just to kind of share it with the world.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think too that there's a lot of room for confusion and deception from a Christian perspective, where you see things like UFOs and the government acknowledges UFOs exist. Well, how does a Christian fit this into their worldview and their perspective? Does this disprove Christianity, or can you take something like this and can you synergize it with the Christian belief systems? And so that's kind of the intent for me as well with this podcast, is I want to join this conversation here and bring a Christian perspective onto it, but I'm also not about trying to ram Jesus down people's throats, because there are plenty of Christians out there that do that, and that gets annoying. So it'll be
100% agree.
Yeah, it'll be weaving it in to our discussions and everything, but it's not about trying to force any of our listeners to become believers, or to make them feel pressured and things like that. We're just trying to have a logical discussion. If you decide to be a believer, I want it to be because you find the logic compelling, not because you feel any pressure or force or anything from either of us here on the podcast.
Yes. I'm gonna just kind of jump into the next thing. So, yeah, I would you mind if we started talking about our like beliefs and viewpoints and stuff?
I was just about to kick off into that, so let me set the stage for you, and then the floor is yours. So
Awesome.
We're going to talk about worldviews here next. Now, what is a worldview? A worldview is the lens through which you see the world. So everyone has a worldview, whether you're a Christian, whether you're Muslim, whether you're atheist, whether you're agnostic, whatever you are, you have a worldview. You have a perspective on how the world came to be. And it's important to discuss this and to acknowledge this, because even though I am a pretty objective person, I strive to be as objective as I can be. There are going to be assumptions you make, and there are going to be biases that we all have to some degree or another. And I want to be aware of that, as aware of it as I can. And I'm sure you do too. And that's part of having, a logical discourse and everything here, is to be aware of where we're both coming from and to have a discussion from that perspective. So tell us a little bit about your worldview, Trace.
Okay. So I'm going to start off with a little bit of background here. So I went to a Christian private school. I grew up in the church and everything. My dad would help out in the church, and I'd go to the little youth groups. In like middle high school, I went to youth group, did a bunch of stuff with them. But I was never really one for church. The Christian school that I did go to, they were a bit interesting in some of their views, especially the church that ran it. So, like Josiah said about not forcing belief, I despise people that do that kind of stuff. And I know that might be a little wrong for a Christian to say, but I just not a big fan of it. So my religion is kind of a loose follow. Um, I don't really like to go to church, like I said. It's just not kind of my thing. I like to pursue it in my own ways. I don't really like people telling me what to necessarily believe and everything. How I view God is not really as a like a leader towering over me kind of thing. I kind of view him as a close friend. Um, and so far, I I mean, I think it's been working out pretty well for me. I've had a lot of doors open for me, and just every once in a while I sit back and I'm like, man, I realized that he opened that door for me. So like, thanks, man. Great. Uh, so I just kind of like I said, I just kind of have a loose following of it, and I'm pretty strong in my faith. Nothing can really deter me. I think I've been pretty strong all my life. My viewpoints have changed a little bit. I am also what you might say a Christian who curses sometimes. I'm not going to do it here
No,
because
yeah,
we're family
Def-
friendly.
definitely not. Yeah, so we'll get to the ground rules for the podcast and everything here in a couple minutes, but that will be one of our ground rules is no profanity. So if Trace curses, I'll yell at him and just like bleep it out or something or edit it out, whatever. So yeah, anything else, Trace?
Um, yeah, I'll also say, I will be coming, like, how I kind of view the world around me, because we're getting into worldview here. So, how I quite literally view the world is like I am a bit of a hippie at heart,
Yes, you are.
and so, yes, so I look, I'm a very nature enthusiast as I'm going into marine biology here, and I come from a standpoint of that we are the stewards of God's creation, and quite often I'm looking outside or something. I'm like, man, this is amazing. But yeah, I think that's about all I can say right now.
Yeah, and I would agree with that. I definitely would agree. We are stewards of God's creation, and I don't think that we are doing the best job of that right now. I would probably think that from slightly different perspective than you might think that, but we can get into that at a later time. So
No, I
my
will say,
go ahead.
sorry, I will say another ground rule because it kind of directly follows this is we're not going to be discussing politics or anything like that. So you don't have to worry about me talking about um, like climate change or whatever stuff like that.
Yeah, well, I guess we'll just get into that now then, and I'll explain my worldview because I was going to get to that later, but I guess you brought that up, so
Sorry,
it's all good.
sorry,
It's all good.
sorry.
It's all good. I got to bust your chops, some man. But yeah, so our ground rules here are pretty simple. It's going to be family friendly show. It's not going to be any profanity or anything like that. We are going to religiously avoid politics. This is not a political show. We're not trying to have a political discussion or debate on who's running for the next election, things like that. There may be certain points that politics do inadvertently tie into whatever topic that we're talking about, but it will be strictly relevant, and it's not going to be a political debate or anything. It's just going to be how it affects that topic. And then the last thing as well is that there's not going to be sexual topics discussed on this podcast, save when it's relevant. So like, for example, Greek mythology, there is a lot of sexual content there, and some of it, like certain things like the R word, if that triggers you, be aware at this point, like rape, certain instances of that do occur in like Greek mythology. So when we get to stuff like that, we're going to call it as it is. We're not going to dance around the bush. So if that's something that you don't deem as family friendly, then, listen with caution. So that's kind of the ground rules. I don't think I missed anything. Those are kind of our big three.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. So my worldview, I grew up in a Christian home, very strong believer. I do go to church pretty regularly. I have had faith struggles in the past. I haven't believed my whole life. I grew up believing, and then I've kind of had a couple waverings and everything, because I've looked at a lot of the topics going on and everything, and seeing stuff like the UFOs and everything, and really diving into this whole subject matter. It's kind of made me question everything for a while. And it took a little bit of time for me to kind of circle back around. So, for those of you listening and think, oh, great, this is just another person trying to ram Christianity down our throats, it's like, no, I followed the logic. I followed the logic around. And to me, from my limited logical perspective, that led me away from Christianity for, a couple short stints of my life. But ultimately, I came back around and I kind of realized that, no, Christianity, in my opinion, from where I'm coming from the logic I'm using, Christianity is definitely the way. It is absolutely true. So that's where I'm coming from. I have I'll just get out there and say it. This might upset some of you. You might think I'm not very scientific for saying this. I am a very literal 6-day creationist, but I will interject that and say that I'm not convinced that the Earth is 6,000 years old or even 10,000 years old. I would kind of err more on the side of it being 20, maybe a little bit older. And this is mostly speculation on my part. This isn't something that I've researched thoroughly enough to have a concrete opinion on. And I think that that's something that's important to acknowledge too, is that if I haven't researched a topic thoroughly and I haven't thought through it thoroughly, I'm not going to have a strong opinion on it. I am open to learn. We can all be wrong. We can all need to change our perspectives at certain points to be logically consistent with ourselves. And I think that each of us owes it to ourselves to be logically consistent and follow the truth wherever that leads, whether that's atheism or Christianity or wherever else. Did I miss anything?
Yeah. I also just want to add here. We'll also be trying to be careful to not say any fallacies or logical fallacies or anything like that. But if we do, please call us out and we'll try and fix it as best as we can, because we are learning just as much as all of you guys.
Yeah, so we're looking kind of more of the Socratic method of discussion and debate and everything here, looking to identify logical fallacies and things like that as well. So that's definitely a great point to bring up. We're looking to be logically consistent, so we'll have listener communications and stuff as well. That contact info will be at the end of the episode. But yeah, if you think we have a logical fallacy, feel free to reach out to us. And if you reach out to us and try to correct us on something and you have a logical fallacy, I'll correct you on it once or twice. And if you keep doing it, I'm just going to laugh at you and say, you're doing ad hominem or ad hom for short, But yeah, anything else that you want to comment on, Trace, or you want to kind of shift over to the next subject area?
I feel like we can shift over.
All right, cool. So let's talk about the name of the podcast and why we agreed on this name. Some of it was my wife, Madison, helped propel the name idea and everything, and then I kind of added to it a little bit. So Musings on Mysteries and the Mythical Matrix. I kind of explained it a little bit, but there's an actual theory as to why I did this, because the short name for the podcast is M-Quad, as in M quadrupled, M to the fourth power. And the reason for this is it's a nod to the idea of the fourth dimension. And this was a perspective that I've recently developed within the last month or so. And it kind of actually spurred on the whole idea of okay, you know what? These are some interesting ideas that we need to discuss out there and really start thinking about. But it's the M-Quad theory at its crux, the M-Quad idea, is that there are indeed 4 dimensions, possibly more. And again, this is just speculation. This is hypothesis stage. I have no proof of this. But the hypothesis here is that the 4th dimension exists, and that is the spiritual. And for those of you that are a little bit confused on what the 4th dimension would be, there's I forget the YouTuber, but there's a great YouTube video about this. If you look up 4th dimensional theory, it should be one of the first ones that pops up. But basically, he takes he poses the question, what would happen if you took a 4th dimensional sphere and you forced it through the 3rd dimension, right? So to do that, we kind of have to step down. So, okay, what would that look like if we took a 3rd dimensional sphere and forced it through the 2nd dimension? So 2nd dimension's like, stick figures on a piece of paper. So if we took a sphere and we were able to somehow force it through a piece of paper and there was a stick man observing it, what would that look like to him? It would look like a circle. It would look like a little tiny dot, and then it would look like a circle that gets bigger and bigger and bigger till it reaches the maximum circumference of the sphere. And then it would get smaller and smaller and smaller, turn into a dot, and then disappear again. So if you were to take this idea and you were to superimpose it from the 3rd to the 4th dimension, basically what you're doing is you would see like a tiny little sphere, like a little marble, and then it would get bigger and bigger, bigger, tennis ball size, basketball size, however, bouncy ball size, however big the 4th dimensional sphere is till it reaches its max circumference. And then it would start shrinking back down to that, basketball size, to that tennis ball size, to that little marble, and then disappear again. Disappearing again is definitely an interesting perspective to think about. So what if that's how the spiritual works? What if that's how angelic and demonic and spirits and everything connects, is you have this 4th dimensional component? Because then we've taken the spiritual and we've quantified it to a science, in a sense, which is a really cool idea, and it is 100% worth discussing, at least in my opinion. Maybe some of you are looking at me like, he's just a crazy kook. But that's why Trace and I are here, is we're excited by this idea and topics within this category, and to discuss them, expand upon it, and to just say what if, you know? Did I miss anything in that theory, Trace? Anything you want to add?
I will say, when you first came at me with this theory, I also thought you were a crazy kook. So there's that.
Yeah, and then you brought up the good point too of like, hey, you know, maybe this is why in the Bible we have all these wacky descriptions of not aliens, of angels and everything like that. You know, where you have like these wheels with eyes that spin and everything, and you have these four-faced beasts and everything, because you have, you know, these prophets that are going to the spiritual realm, to God's throne room, and they are seeing things that are fourth dimensional, and they're trying to quantify it in the third dimension, but their mind isn't able to fully understand it and wrap around it and quantify it. And so again, this is
Yeah, and that.
know, yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead.
Nope. I've been rambling a while. Your turn.
Gosh, okay. So that also might be a reason, like, why the angels would come down and say, "Be not afraid," because, well, they're an incomprehensible being to us, and they're just popping out of nowhere, and, you know, just like, hey, don't be scared.
Meanwhile, the person's just screaming in the corner. It's like that meme with the guy with the frying pan that's all confused and everything, just sitting in the corner screaming because there's an angel that just popped up out of nowhere. But it explains so much about how, like, the understanding of how the fourth dimension works and everything, and how, you know, beings are able to appear and disappear. It's like, well, they're not appearing and disappearing. They're just traveling through another dimension that we don't have access to.
Mm-hmm.
And then that also quantifies certain things like the aspects of the Trinity, you know, where God would be beyond all of these dimensions. And we could talk about that a little bit in a couple minutes here, and that was part of my faith seeking. God is beyond all dimensions, including time, but he would have certain components of these, of all of the dimensions that he's created, even though he would be beyond them. And so that's why you have, you know, a God that is, you know, from the Bible, from the biblical perspective, you have a Trinity where you have three, you know, separate beings that are still all the Godhead. You have three distinct individuals that are still one. It's like, that doesn't make any sense. Well, of course it doesn't. You know, we're trying to quantify, you know, fourth or beyond fourth, obviously, you know, beyond fourth dimensional being into our third dimension. Anything you want to add?
No, I wouldn't say so. I think you're still pretty on track here.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's your designated job here, is to try to, I guess your designated job would be more playing like devil's advocate, if you will. You're trying to like, to pick apart the ideas and everything that I suggest, and then we'll reverse roles as well, because you'll be bringing myth and everything with like Norse and all of that, and doing some of your own research.
Yes.
And presenting stuff and trying to draw connections and everything, and I'll help draw connections, and I'll also play devil's advocate, just for the, you know, the sake of logical discourse and debate, because that's how we learn, and that's how we grow as people, and that's really important. And I think that that's somewhat lacking in this modern day and age, and we need to get back to that. We need to get back to having logical discourse and discussions on interesting, uncomfortable, bizarre topics. So
yes, I 100% agree there.
So let's see here. Let's talk a little bit about future shows and what are we going to tackle next. So I'll kind of run through the outline, and you can kind of interject and add things that you want to add. So the first thing we're going to do a series where we're going to go through Genesis 1 to 11, because that's kind of the fundamental components of the Bible that everything is built on. And we're going to deconstruct it. And I'll talk a little bit more about deconstruction and everything here in a couple minutes. But we're going to run through Genesis 1 to 11. Some of those episodes might be like, you know, one episode is barely a chapter. Other episodes might be like 3 chapters in one episode, depending on the content and how far we want to dive into it. I also have a trip planned soon where I'm going to go to the Ark Encounter in Kentucky, and I'm going to take pictures and videos and stuff and everything, and we're going to talk about all of that. I'm also going to stop at Serpent Mound in Ohio, and we're going to discuss all of that on the podcast. And then I'm coming from a literal 6-day creationist perspective. So one of our first guests on the show is going to be a pastor friend of mine, and he's going to come on, and he has a different perspective. He is not a literal 6-day creationist, and I don't have pastoral training. He does. So we're going to have a logical discussion on that, and he's going to kind of tell us his thoughts and why he believes what he believes, and we're going to talk about it with each other, and, you know, politely and respectfully see if we can change each other's minds, or at the very least understand each other's ideas and see what we do agree on, what we disagree on. From there,
Yeah, and I'm just kind of here for the ride.
yeah, pretty
I'm
much.
just listening.
Yeah. And then from there, what we're going to do is I have a couple guests lined up that are going to talk about UFOs. So we're going to dive into the whole alien and UFO thing and how that ties into like occultic stuff and that whole category. And then from there, we're going to talk about fairies and Norse mythology, and that'll start kicking off the actual the mythology portion a little bit more. But whether you believe the Bible or not, it definitely warrants study when you're talking about myth, because whether you believe the Bible is 100% true or whether you believe it's 100% myth, there is still relevance when you're doing comparative mythology study to start with the Bible. And I chose to start with the Bible for a reason, and it's that I believe that there is more evidence to suggest that the Bible is uncorrupted in its accounts from the start. It's not what would be the right word for that? Mythologized? I'm not sure. We need someone to like, I don't know. Here, help me out. You're the one that's supposed to correct me on stuff when I'm wrong.
uh, I don't know. Mythologized?
All right, we'll say
I've
that.
messed that
Mythologized. I
word up
like
a lot.
that.
Yep.
That's a mouthful. That's a tongue twister for sure. But I don't believe the Bible is
It'll work.
mythologized at all. And we'll get into that as we deconstruct Genesis 1 to 11. I'll explain why. I'll give all my reasons for believing that and everything. Whereas I believe other myths, they're myths for a reason. We don't generally refer to or generally understand the Bible as a myth, but we call Greek mythology. There's a reason for that. So I think going somewhere that gives us kind of the ground rules of, at least as far as I'm able to determine, truth, I think that gives us a good starting point to start comparing other things to and seeing how all of these pieces start fitting together. But even if you don't believe the Bible, that's totally fine. We're not trying to force this down your throat. But I would encourage you from a logical debate perspective and a logical discourse perspective that it still warrants listening to and exploring and hearing the ideas. Because, the best case scenario, maybe your mind is shifted to something that's true that you didn't see. Worst case scenario, you're more entrenched in what you already believe. Like it's a win-win scenario either way. What is it? Oh, shoot, I forget who said it, but there's someone out there, I think it's some great philosopher or something, but he said that the mark of a fully matured and advanced mind is to be able to entertain an idea without accepting it. So to just be able to listen and hear someone else's perspective, but not necessarily say, you know what, I agree with that. Like to say, you know what, I disagree with that, but that's still an interesting idea. That's kind of the mark of a fully mature, developed, logical mind. So I would respectfully say that if you're afraid of hearing a different perspective, then you might not quite be there yet. And that's the intent of this podcast, is to try to help bring listeners in to have that discourse and have that discussion.
Yes. I also wanted to add a little more from you saying the Bible isn't like myth. I would say, I mean, I also haven't done any research into this. This is just at a cursory glance. Which also, a little side note, my stance is also from a kind of an uneducated, somewhat outsider viewpoint. So back to my original point, I do think that there is a possibility that some of the Bible is exaggerated, is like because over time, mistranslations or just like people just like, oh, well, this is what I saw, but I'm gonna change it a little bit so it sounds cooler. Like sailor stories.
Yeah, like fishing
I
stories.
mean,
Every single time you tell how big the fish was when you caught it, it gets a little bit bigger, right?
yeah, but I will say that there's always some sort of truth behind the legend or the myth, and yeah, so that's just kind of what we're here to discuss, is that truth behind the myth, or I don't want to say the truth, because that kind of makes me feel like I am just pushing this idea out there. It's like, this is the right idea. I don't want to say that. It is whenever I say the truth, I just mean like my truth, or just like the best possibility that we conclude on in whatever discussion we might have. So
it's the most logical conclusion you've reached that you personally believe to be true. I don't like so much the term your truth, but I get at what you're saying deeper down, and I agree with that.
yes, yes.
Because there is, again, this from a logical perspective, there is no your truth, my truth. There is the truth, but we're also going to have our interpretations and our ability to understand the truth, and we might not have an absolutely perfect perspective on it. When people say my truth and your truth, they're talking more about perspectives and things like that. Like, for example, if someone like falls off a cliff, person one falls off a cliff and is hanging on the edge. Person two runs over and is trying to, help pull them up, and then person one falls. Person three is down below and sees that, person one is falling and person two is, standing, right there. They're like, oh, they pushed them over. That might be their perspective, quote unquote, their truth, but that is not the truth. There is an absolute objective truth, and that is what we're trying to find. So yeah, whenever we say, this is true, we're talking about, what we personally believe. Because I want to be careful about that, because I do believe there are certain things that are absolutely true, and I'm not going to compromise my beliefs on that. But I'm also not going to try to say that this is absolutely true, therefore you must believe this or else, kind of a thing.
hmm So that actually reminds me of a point that I wanted to make earlier as well. Do you mind if I get into uh, kind of the rainbow theory I kind of discussed to you kind of before?
Yeah, sure, send it.
Okay, so kind of it surrounds the truth and like what one person's truth is compared to the next person's truth. So, everyone I feel might know Noah's flood and the rainbow and the promise of not flooding the earth. I think it's more of a deeper meaning than that. So, the truth, right? What the Bible might say is truth, uh, someone could interpret wrong, and then they think something else of it. Or, there's the Jewish religion, there's the Christian religion, there's all these different religions out there. Who's to say who's right? Because everyone believes their truth. So I think that um, if you're like just deep in your faith and you are following in your faith in the way you interpret it, um, I think the rainbow is more of a promise not to immediately damn you. Because my idea of it is uh, Noah's truth was that the earth was going to flood, so he needed to build an ark. Everyone else's truth was, oh, well, that's not possible. Rain isn't a thing. Um, and they all got condemned for it. So I think the rainbow is more of a promise not to condemn absolutely everyone for not believing the 100% truth according to God, or, whatever kind of idea that someone else might follow. Um,
Yeah,
so that's just kind of my stance as well.
yeah, and I would disagree with that, but that's perfectly fine. It's a fair idea to have. It's a fair logical perspective and everything. I think that there is an absolute truth. Again, where it did rain, and all of that definitely happened, and that was objectively going to happen. But yeah, people certainly didn't believe that. I would say that people are accountable for what they're given. And you see this principle taught out in the Bible with what Jesus says and teaches, when to whom much is given, much is required. And then the implication there is if you're not given much, not much is going to be expected of you. So as a Christian, and this is, we'll get into this later on in the podcast. We're going to talk about this whole rainbow theory and everything a whole lot more, I feel like, in Genesis 6 and 7, when we deconstruct that and talk about the flood. And then as well, we are also going to do a study into, that was another subject as well I forgot to mention. We're going to do a study into how God of the Bible has supposedly revealed himself to people across time and across cultures. Because obviously not everyone had the chance to accept Jesus as their Lord and Savior before dying. There were plenty, there were tribes in North and South America, in Russia, all these places, far removed, in Australia, in remote places of southern Africa that didn't have a chance once Jesus came to immediately hear the gospel. So then what happens to them? Do they automatically go to hell? I don't think so. I think that God is going to be a fair judge and judge them based off of what they had available to understand at the time. And this is, we'll get into this, a lot more in another episode. I mean, unless you wanted to talk about this a bit more, Trace. But the intent is I have a good book, a good resource on hand that I'll read in the near future, and we'll kind of dive into bits and pieces and highlights of it and everything, and talk about how God, has supposedly revealed Himself throughout time and creation and everything, and kind of leading up to the ultimate point of people are only accountable for really what they know and what they're able to know. Like, if you live in a remote tribe in the Amazon and you've never heard the name of Jesus, you're not going to be expected to confess that Jesus is Lord and believe in your heart He was raised from the dead, or you'll be condemned to hell, kind of a thing. Like, God's not going to expect that of you, because that's not fair, that you didn't have a chance to believe. But did you believe the best that you could with what you were given? And I might be mistaken here, but I think we are kind of saying the same thing to a degree, just maybe from a different perspective.
Yeah, because you're describing more of like I agree with you on pretty much everything. I didn't word it as well and as in depth, but yeah, I agree. I kind of explained the broad side of it. You went into the details of it, so I think we are on the same page here on that.
Okay, cool. So yeah, and that's another thing too. I'll acknowledge this. I'm a huge psychology nerd. That's like a Myers-Briggs difference. I'm a ESFJ, ISFJ. I haven't really fully figured out which. But I'm a very detail, logic oriented, and I think you'd kind of be more of like the INFP type. So your logic is going to be kind of more very broad and objective in perspective and everything as a whole. So that's another fair thought to acknowledge here as well, is that we're coming at it from different frameworks and everything. Anything else you want to add on that, or is it all right if I shift over to the next topic here?
I think next topic. Let's do it.
All right. So deconstruction. What is it, and why should you, as the listener, care? Let's make it relevant here. So deconstruction, as defined on Wikipedia, I'm going to do this off the hip here. I don't have anything in front of me, but it's jettisoning beliefs previously held that the thinker, whoever it is that's doing the deconstruction, believes are no longer relevant or incorrect. So on a surface level, that sounds really good. I have deconstructed. I am constantly deconstructing. I am a huge fan of that idea. That is at the crux. That is a logical debate. That is a logical reflection to look back and to continue to further your understanding. On the flip side of that, though, I would say that a lot of people don't put in the effort to do all the research that they should. I think that a lot of people make very quick decisions in their quote-unquote deconstruction, and they don't follow the logical process all the way through. They don't consider things all the way. I've seen people on social media that'll deconstruct and say that something happens in the Bible says a certain thing, and I'll go to those specific passages and look at the actual original Hebrew, and even just like common translations like the NIV, NASB, King James, all that stuff, and the Bible doesn't even say that. And that's just poor logic at that point, for lack of better words. I'm not trying to attack anyone that does that, but that's just poor logic, and you're harming yourself at that point. You're failing yourself. You're letting yourself down. You're not thinking everything through properly. You're making quick snap decisions. And from what I've seen, because I've kind of been on the social media platform a bit, and I've seen a lot of the deconstruction movement and everything, and I've kind of been following it a bit. It's kind of sad to me, because I can tell that a lot of these people that deconstruct, their motivation, their core motivation, if they're honest with themselves, I don't think is actually the logical thought process. I don't think it's the Socratic debate method, the Socratic like discussion and logical discourse method. I think it's pain. I think it's emotional pain, where they've been wounded by the church. They've been wounded by an emotionally abusive church. They've been spiritually damaged. Therefore, they see the deconstruction movement. They see a couple things that on a quick surface glance don't quote unquote line up. And they just use that as an excuse to say, okay, I'm not a Christian anymore. I'm a deconstructionist. And I have mixed. Let me say one more thing, then I'll let you jump in here. Okay. I have mixed feelings about that. from the logical side of me says that is very disingenuous. For lack of better words, the logical side of me, the colder side of me says, shame on you. You owe it to yourself to actually think through all of this stuff and everything. But the empathetic side of me is like, I'm so sorry. As a Christian, I am so sorry that the church failed you to such a degree that you decided to abandon logical thought and abandon your faith that you've held for years, sometimes decades, just because people didn't live as Christ wanted them to. And that breaks my heart, honestly. Like that really breaks my heart. And that's why I want to dive into this deconstruction topic, is because I want to bring that logical thought into it that a lot of these people that have been hurt struggle to have.
Yeah, and I think that this, like if the church chases you out, I think that is, it may not be the right decision, at least like logic-wise, like you said, but I think it's a completely valid reason.
Absolutely,
because,
yes.
Yeah, if you've got a toxic environment, you need to cut yourself off of it. And that's kind of like some of where I come from too, is the church was a little rough for me. That's why I don't go to church anymore.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that those reasons are completely valid. Are they the right decision? I mean, for them, yes. But the deeper meaning of it is, like you said, it is kind of sad that there are people out there that would drive people away from that.
Yeah. And, Jesus talks about this even. He says, if any of you cause like a little one to stumble, it'll be better for you if a millstone were tied around your neck and you were hurled into the ocean, literally like drowned and choked and suffocated all at the same time. And he's not saying he's going to do that. He's saying it would be better if that had happened to you versus what he is going to do on Judgment Day, unless you repent from something like that. And so there's a lot of accountability for believers out here. Now, I want to circle back to something that you said there. You said about that being the best decision for them. I would both agree and disagree. I think that I'm a huge psychology nerd. I'm going to preface that here. I studied psychology as my undergraduate degree, my bachelor's degree. I think we all, to some degree or another, whether we realize it or not, no matter how honest we want to be with ourselves, we carry some form of toxicity, some form of trauma, something that is going to put a slant on how we see the world and we see things. And do I think it's objectively the right decision to leave church altogether because you had a bad experience with one or two churches? No, I don't think that that's right. But from a traumatized person perspective, where someone's already been traumatized by something else in life, and then they get traumatized by the church and they get emotionally and spiritually abused by the church, for them, I can absolutely 100% understand why you would run away from the church. It makes sense to me. It's a self-preservation mechanism. It's a, fight or flight kind of a thing, fight, flight, or freeze, So I 100% understand it, but I can't, to be consistent with myself, I can't say doing something like that is right. You're still failing yourself. You're still logically letting yourself down by avoiding the discourse and the thought. You're letting the emotions control you instead of using your logical thought process and your ability to critically think to help you make the right decision.
And again, I will say some people, they may not, like in the moment, they may not have that capability.
Absolutely, I agree.
Logically think. Like,
yes.
There's definitely been situations I've been in where it's just like I'm just spitting out words that don't even make sense to me even. Yeah. So I wouldn't say that's any. Let me rephrase. I don't think it's the right decision. It is. It just completely left my mind.
Gotta love that, right? When you're on the spot. That's almost happened to me a couple times already, man. Doing podcasting's a lot harder than it seems.
Yeah, I mean, I'm still kind of viewing this as just like me and you talking, but like even then, I've said some. I think you can attest. I've said some interesting things.
Absolutely.
For the moment.
There was one time we were going to see the Godzilla movie, or I think it was Godzilla, one of the Godzilla movies or something.
I don't know. It was a movie, and I walk up to the ticket person and I get my ticket, and the everyone can relate or has seen it at some point. But they say, "Enjoy your movie." I say, "You too." Nah, and I just walk away. Like that's exactly what I said. I stopped mid words. No, and just left.
Gotta love it, dude. It's fantastic. But we all have those awkward moments. It's happened to all of us. But I had just walked away. I was so disappointed when you came over and told me that. I'm like, man, I just almost saw that and I missed it. But yeah, I mean, it sounds like we agree a lot more than we think at a quick glance here. But that we just have to kind of tackle it and open it and talk about it a little bit. So.
Mm-hmm.
I'll also do a quick sub note here, and I'll apologize to all of the listeners and everything out there if the audio isn't absolutely perfect. Number one, I'm still learning how to do all this stuff with like all the audio equipment for the podcast to balance the audio properly. I also got exposed this week. I was out in the woods. I got exposed to like biological warfare of like this freaking pollen crap, dude. Like I was like literally me and a bunch of other people that were with me, like we all like got sick and got fevers and everything like from this pollen. So I'm like, I almost lost my voice this morning. I've been drinking tea like all day, having throat lozenges, things like that. I'm trying not to like cough or clear my throat or anything, even though it's pretty instinctive for me at this point. But yeah, if any of that comes through, I will apologize to the listeners. We're not professionals yet, but we will get there eventually.
Eventually. I've also been kind of going through a cold right now, so
Yeah, and
there's been a few
we're
moments
also
where I had to mute to cough myself.
we're also not physically together, so we're running you through a call, and I've got all the equipment set up on my end. I'm a couple states away from you right now, so that's definitely another factor here too.
Yeah, eventually we will be in person, and this will all go a lot smoother, hopefully.
Yeah. Well, anything else you want to say on the deconstruction topic?
No, I think we kind of covered most. At least for me, I'm good.
Yeah, I think so. But yeah, so that's kind of why I want to tackle Genesis first. Is it's kind of a dual thing where I've seen a lot of this deconstruction movement and everything. Where primarily I believe it's important to study, to look at Genesis when you're looking to dive into any myth. But secondarily, seeing all this deconstruction stuff out there, seeing the inconsistencies that all these people have out there when they're following the logical process and all of that, I want to try to correct that and bring clarity to a lot of this stuff and to tackle these issues. So we're going to go through, certain sections we might kind of skim over. Other sections, it's going to be very much verse by verse. I'm going to pull up, original Hebrew stuff and everything, and we're going to talk through, what these words mean and use the Bible to translate the Bible. So like taking, a specific word that's in like a verse, if we want to understand it a little bit better, we're going to take it and we're going to compare how that word is used across other texts. Because for those of you that speak another language, you'll know this automatically. But for those of you that don't speak another language, you might not be aware of this, but words don't always directly translate. When you're translating documents, especially when you're trying to translate something like ancient Hebrew or ancient Greek into modern English, we sometimes just don't have the words to describe the true intent of what that word is. And so it's important to really look at what that word means and what it could mean in different contexts so that you can actually look at it yourself and understand whether or not this word was actually translated correctly. And that can lead to a lot of theological confusion and theological issues and everything, is where if you're dealing with a Bible verse that is mistranslated. I personally believe that the entire Bible, the entire Old Testament and New Testament, is the inerrant word of God, and that it is flawless. It is 100% true. I as a Christian 100% believe that. I will, however, caveat that and say I do not believe that every translation is inerrant. I actually don't really believe that any translation is inerrant. I think that if you assume in a blanket statement that the Word of God is inerrant, and you therefore then assume that the English translation of the Bible is inerrant, you are doing yourself a disservice there, and I think that you need to dive in a little bit more to what the original Hebrew and the original Greek says in certain topics, especially certain topics that might cause you theological or emotional harm or struggles or anything like that. And I know this because I've personally been faced with these issues, and I'm not going to get into that right now. There have been certain issues I've struggled with in Scripture a ton, and I've had to, figure out how to go to the original Hebrew and figure out what this word means and study it in its context and everything to actually understand what's going on, because the English translation has been distorted and has ultimately been a failure. And so that's another thing that's important to bear in mind. And so when we're deconstructing Genesis, we're going to tackle verses like this. We're going to dive head first into that to deconstruct properly and to give people the tools in aiding in their deconstruction. Because I want everyone to deconstruct. I want everyone to reflect logically and decide what does and doesn't align with logic and with how the world works, and to hone in and pursue the truth, to seek out the truth. That is my intent.
Yeah, and I do want to interject here. I think it would be great because we really want to have a platform to interact with other people as well. So I think it would be great if we could get story people deconstructing, just like.
So hey, you cut out there for a second, buddy. So can you still hear me?
Oh man.
Yeah, we cut out there. You cut out there for a second.
Okay.
So if you could restart that, yeah. I don't think I'll be able to edit that out. That's a bit too jumbled, so that's all right. No mistakes. Go.
So I think we're using this platform as we want listener interaction here.
Yes.
So people with stories of deconstruction or just like general questions, we want to talk about them or answer questions or just discuss.
Yes, absolutely. 100%.
Whether
agree.
we address it through social media and to comments or whatever, we are all for it.
Yeah, so I'll throw in, because we're getting near the end of the show here, so I'll throw in all of our social media stuff and everything here, and then we can kind of talk about that a little bit more as well. But I definitely agree. We definitely want to interact with our listeners. So if you want to get a hold of us, send us a question, your thoughts, comments, snide remarks, anything like that, you can email us at m.quad.musings@gmail.com. And those are all just regular, periods. That's not DOT. So m.quad.musings@gmail.com. Our Instagram and TikTok handles are m.quad.musings. You can find us on Facebook as well. Musings on Mysteries in the Mythical Matrix --mquad. You search us on any of those platforms, we're there. I haven't posted content this past week, but I'm going to try to be somewhat consistent to post something, whether it's snippets of the podcast or whether it's just me or Trace sharing our thoughts on a specific subject weekly. And then I do very much interact with people on there. If you interact with us in any capacity on social media or email or anything, expect that it could possibly get brought up in the show. Someone leaves a nasty Facebook comment and says, "Oh, you're stupid" or something like that. I'm probably just going to bring it up on air here and laugh at you. So don't do ad hom. Don't do ad hom. Don't be a troll. We're going to study a lot of mythology here. We're going to look into a lot of trolls. We don't need any more trolls. But yes, no, our intent is 100% is to interact with people. If you have ideas, if you have experiences with deconstruction, heck, if you even want to share how you've been hurt by the church, I know that could be kind of a personal thing, but that would definitely be something as well that we would potentially mention and bring up in our discussions and everything. If you have thoughts on mysteries that you want to hit on, or you have thoughts on a mystery we discuss, or if you have thoughts on myths, or you've studied a certain myth and you want to correct us on something, like, please, by all means, if you correct me on something I say, or you correct Trace on something that he says, we're gonna, as long as you give us the absolute logical proof and you lay out a convincing logical argument, we're going to admit that. We're not perfect. We're not all knowing. We're not omniscient, anything like that. We are still learning. We are still seekers of truth ourselves. We are stumbling our way through the world like everybody else is. So please, we welcome it. Just have a logical discourse. If you use a logical fallacy, I'll respectfully call you out on it. But if you do ad hom, I'm just going to make fun of you. Like if you do ad hom, I'll do ad hom back. Basically, is what I'm saying. It'll
Yeah, and if we do the fallacies, call us out on it too.
Yes, please.
It's a two-way
Yes.
street here.
Yes.
So, yes.
Yes. Another thing you've probably picked up on too at this point, if you've made it this far into our ramblings here, because this isn't even musings at this point, this is just more ramblings, is we're very much tongue in cheek.
Yeah.
We kind of like to pick on each other a little bit, and like to. So if you email us, if you contact us or anything like that, if you have something a little bit more serious or anything like that, like obviously we're not going to pick on that. But if you have a logical fallacy, especially like ad hom, like be prepared that we're gonna pick on you too, like you'll hear Trace and I picking on each other, kind of a thing. It's like if you communicate with us and you interact with us, especially regularly, you're kind of become an informal part of like the MQuad family here. And with that kind of comes, the tongue-in-cheek comments and everything at certain points. So we're not trying to offend anyone, but there will definitely be funny, goofy comments made and, some snide remarks made from time to time on the podcast as well. Nothing inappropriate, nothing out of bad taste or anything like that. But, just some off the hip, out of pocket comments to, kind of keep them on their toes. Right, Trace?
Oh, yeah.
Well, we are coming up right about an hour here, and that's kind of what we projected that this could potentially take. Do you have any final thoughts for wrapping up the show here?
No, I do want to say most of the social media is going to be, I feel like, from Josiah, but I will try and do some videos to put on there. I think in terms of that, Josiah is going to be more of the biblical Christianity videos, and I'm gonna just try and do some maybe like fun stories from myth, or just little fun things. I've got a couple ideas going right now, and I also just want to say that not all of this is going to be talking purely about the Bible, like we said.
Yes.
Our
absolutely
track is right now is like touch on Genesis a bit, and then get into some UFOs and then Norse mythology, some ideas further down the line, where I do want to cover some like Dante's Inferno stuff, the Christian fan fiction, as some might call it.
There you go.
But we got a lot of ideas here, and we are open to many more.
Yes, that's another thing too, is if you have a subject you want us to talk about or something, you're like, hey, you should go this way, send that in. We welcome listener communications. We want your ideas. We want your feedback. We want your thoughts. But yes, no, Trace is absolutely right. This is not going to just be, oh, Jesus, Jesus, Jesus kind of podcast. He's my Lord and Savior. He's the most important thing to me. But there has to be more substance to discuss than just Christianity. We're discussing a whole plethora of ideas here. And so this is more of a philosophical, logical discussion. We're not trying to just talk about nothing but Christianity. So the first several podcasts, if you hate Christianity, you're going to hate the first several podcasts episodes. But after that, it should mellow out a bit. So the next couple podcasts we're going to be doing is we're going to do Genesis 1, deconstruction. We're going to do that, I think, next week and try to get that out within the next, I'd say probably a little bit after the 19th, 20th, something in there. And then after that, I'm going to have my pastor friend come on, and he's a proponent of the gap theory, and I am a literal 6-day creationist. So we're going to talk a little bit about that and about why we both believe what we believe, kind of have a little bit of like a friendly debate, see if we can change each other's minds. If not, cool, you just at the very least understand where the other is coming from. And then from there, we're going to trail along and continue deconstructing the rest of Genesis. But I think Genesis 1 is going to be very cool, very fun to deconstruct. I think that there's a lot of stuff in there that a lot of people don't realize from a Christian perspective that might be a little bit mind-blowing, might be a little bit weird, and some of it you may like, some of it you may not like. But I'm just going to do the best I can to lay out the facts and lay out the logic with a good, fair, logical discussion with Trace to kind of balance me out here. And then we're going to let you hear the other side on some Christian interpretation and everything as well. I am not afraid of anyone that disagrees with my views. It's either, hey, you're going to show me that yes, I'm right and I know more of why I'm right now, or you're going to show me, oh man, I'm wrong. I need to change my perspective. Thank you. You've helped me align myself, more in my seeking of the truth. And that's the overall intent of this podcast here is to seek the truth, to find the truth as best we can, and then to just logically speculate on things like, the mythical matrix and myths and how they might connect and what they're trying to tell us. And then also speculate on mysteries like Bigfoot, 411, UFOs, all this stuff. So we're going to dive into a lot of fringe topics that a lot of churches might be a little bit afraid of and everything. So, but yeah, Trace, any final thoughts?
Definitely. Yeah, just not really. Just we're gonna begin like you said, mythical matrix stuff like that. So we're gonna get into some cool little like creatures, some fun little legends here and there too.
We'll do a sea monster podcast for you too, myths of sea monsters. Don't worry.
Oh yeah, we're
resident fish nerd.
Sea monsters one. But we don't really have a good guest list right now, but I think the plan is to have a few here and there. Maybe I've got a friend that might be interested to join in here and there, just to chat. Not really expert on anything, just to chat here and there. I've got a few ideas and stuff of people to bring on as well. So yeah, we'll have a good little rounded out, just little community here, I guess.
Yeah, pretty much. I do have several guests lined up. I have, I think, a minimum of 3 guests lined up at this point over the next 2 to 3 months of podcasting. But I don't think you have any yet, but you do have some ideas of tentative guests that you're going to try to work on as well. But yeah, I think that's about it here. So unless you have any other complaints, I think we'll wrap it up here. I'll shoot off the social media and email and everything again one more time here for our listeners and call it a night.
Yeah, just be patient with us in the beginning. We're still getting our footing here. Yeah. Things are going to be a little rough to start out with, but we will eventually get the hang of this. Don't worry.
Yep. I mean, you're always going to be a beginner at something when you first kick it off, and you'll get better with time. I know I'll get better with balancing out the audio, figuring out what does and doesn't work in podcasting and everything here. I've done like stop motion work and everything before and adding sound effects to stuff, but this is for the most part pretty new to me. So yeah, please bear with us. Obviously, I think if you've made it this far, you've obviously been patient with our ramblings and everything and all of our musings. So, but yeah, so if you want to get a hold of us, you can email us at m.quad.musings@gmail.com. You can find us on Instagram and TikTok at m.quad.musings. And if you want to find us on Facebook, Musings on Mysteries in the Mythical Matrix -mquad. You search that, should pop right up. Oh, and I guess too, one last thing we could talk about is our logo. Why did we pick a phoenix?
Oh yeah. It was kind of a loose selection, wasn't it?
Yeah, I just put you on the spot there to kind of make you stumble there. Sorry, buddy.
No. I mean, we did talk about this. It was correct me if I'm wrong, but it was kind of a loose selection. And then I was like, well, it does kind of make sense. It's kind of a perfect mix between our Christianity perspective here and also the mythical side of things, because the phoenix is a very prominent mythical creature, and fire and rebirth and just the general image of a phoenix seems to really fit very well into a kind of biblical idea. It just seems very biblical, and maybe not biblical, but like holy, or like it's just a good icon. To me, it just makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll take what you said and kind of refine it down a bit. There's some symbolism and connection to the phoenix, the death and then rebirth through fire and purity. There's a correlation to that sometimes in symbolism in Jesus' death and resurrection. The phoenix, I think, also symbolizes the death of certain perspectives and beliefs that you have, and then it's purified through fire, like how metal is purified through fire. And then it's reborn stronger and better afterwards, after it's been refined by the fire. And then the final thing too is that yes, the phoenix is definitely a mythological creature. It ties into a lot of myth and everything, so it seemed like a good fit here. for everything. It has some good Christian undertones, but it's not. It's also a nod to like all the myth and everything that we're wanting to get into. All of this is the long fluff answer. The real answer to why that we picked the logo is just we both think it looks really cool. So, but then we came up with all the reasons, and we're like, oh yeah, this is totally perfect, you know?
Yeah, so. It's a perfect representation of what this is going to be. We're going to get into something because it just looks cool, and then we'll figure out, oh well, actually, it does kind of make sense.
There you go. I like it. Yeah, coming up with even more reasons on the fly. Sure, I love it. All right. Well, I guess we'll call it a night here. Thank you for listening, everybody. Appreciate it if you made it this far, and hope to have you listen in on the next episode.